This week's episode of our show is sponsored by Terramentia, a new indie passion project launching on Kickstarter this September.
Terramentia is a tabletop RPG that uses a 2d12 system and offers a variety of new classes for you to play as. 18 classes, all with unique and defined class identities.
Each class brings a unique take on resource pools to power their spells and other abilities, from their life force to their spirit to their mind or their mana.
Terramentia is built around a dense and unique world that still leaves lots of room for inspiration and creativity.
In addition to their unique abilities, all of the 18 playable classes are tied into the unique lore of the setting itself, giving each a very distinctive class identity so that no two characters are alike.
Terramentia is currently live on Kickstarter, so if you want to get in on this project and help them reach their goals, then you should check the links down below.
And now, on to this week's episode. During one of our recent games, my monsters got hit by a fireball, and it occurred to us in that moment that there's no condition in D&D 5th edition for when a creature is burning or on fire.
This sparked an entire conversation about elemental conditions in D&D. We've been inspired by games like Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom or Baldur's Gate 3, and we just think that there should be more effects like this in our D&D games.
My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. And today, we're going to homebrew some new conditions to use in our games of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, especially ones involving these elemental effects like burning, shocked, and frozen.
There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
So Kelly and I looked at a lot of our other favorite games, from Divinity Original Sin 2 to Pokemon, games that use elemental effect to great effect.
There are so many instances in these games. Obviously, we've been playing a lot of Tears of the Kingdom in the recent few months, and I just love the idea of equipping the right element to fight your foes and having these awesome effects like being able to set an enemy on fire and watch them burn, or electrocute them and have them drop all of their items, or freezing them in place so that you can smash them. There's so many ways that choosing the right element can be a really fun and exciting part of these games. And in D&D, it's always felt odd to me that when I do enough cold damage or fire damage or lightning damage, that these have no other effect than just a damage type.
We've got poisoned and petrified, but most of the other status conditions in D&D 5e are relegated to effects like stunning and incapacitating other creatures, which are very powerful effects, which we found are less fun. As a dungeon master, when the players shut down your entire encounter with one hypnotic pattern spell, or grasp your big bad evil guy and hold monster, that was one spell that just ended the entire encounter thanks to a really powerful condition.
On the flip side of this, if you're a dungeon master and you use an ability that stuns or incapacitates a player, it's not very fun at the table if that player just has to sit for 3 or 4 rounds doing nothing because they can't get out of the condition that they're being affected by. So we started thinking about elemental conditions, but also what are ways that we can improve conditions in D&D so that you can debilitate your players or have the players debilitate your foes, but without making it not fun at the table, without taking away their ability to actually do something on their turn.
We've also been playing a bit of Pathfinder 2nd edition and looking back to games like 4th edition D&D as well, which have very robust uses of different status conditions. So to set the stage a little bit, I think that we need a couple housekeeping conditions still in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Of course, recent 1D&D playtests have even explored this by adding conditions like dazed back into the game, which means that your character can either move or take an action on their turn, not both, and they also can't take bonus actions. I like dazed. Let's put it in the list.
I also think that there are so many times that there are just actual, what could be called conditions that apply to creatures or characters or whatever that we see time and time again, but they don't have a word to describe them. There are so many effects in the game that reduce your speed to 0, but rather than always writing this reduces your speed to 0, creating a condition like immobilized, which means that your speed becomes 0, makes it much easier at the table to be like, this effect immobilizes you. Same idea, if you are slowed, your speed becomes half. These simple terms make sense when you look at them. Okay, well, my character is slowed. I can only move half my speed. My character is immobilized. I can't move at all. They tell us what they are, and they do it in fewer words than what D&D is currently using.
There's many effects in the game that cause your character to grant advantage when attacks are made against them. Let's call that defenseless. There's also some attacks that mean that when you get hit by an attack, you're automatically crit. We could call that helpless. There's also a few conditions that stop you from taking reactions specifically. So why don't we call that being distracted? Or maybe unreactive, but I like distracted better.
4th edition also had the great bloodied condition, which means that a creature is below 50% health. The reason why I like bloodied is because there's so many ways that we can actually implement it into the game. First of all, it's a shorthand to tell your players that they're about halfway through killing the monster, which oftentimes if you just say the creature is bloodied, it will determine to the players whether they think they can keep fighting and push through or if it's time to run. If they're 4 rounds in and almost at 0 hit points for most of the team and it's not bloodied yet, it might be time to get out of there. But if they have bloodied the monster and they got a few more big spells and actions to pull off, maybe they can push through. On the other hand, if a creature has an ability, often we see recharge on a 5 or 6 or different options like that. But there's a great use here where you could say when the creature is bloodied, this ability replenishes or comes back. And I think that that's a great way to use the 50% health condition of bloodied.
So now that we've looked at a couple housekeeping conditions, basically giving names to effects that are already in the game, but just saying these are conditions now, we can have other conditions that refer to them or other spells or effects that refer to them too, and it saves us text and makes it an easy reference point. Yes, maybe players are going to have to memorize what these things are, but you can always put those on a reference sheet or on the inside of a GM screen. And there's tons of people that make handy little reference coins or tools that you can now put these beside your miniature or load them into your VTT. So I think that adding a few more terms like this actually makes it easier to remember because it's kind of a mnemonic. It gives you that quick reference point and it gives you those reference tools. So with these all out of the way, let's go back to the original idea and make some elemental conditions, because I feel like we could build on some of what we've done and have the elemental conditions build off of those.
Going back to Tears of the Kingdom again, but I think this is pretty notorious for the shocked condition in any video game. What I love about shocking monsters in Tears of the Kingdom is that they drop whatever they're holding. So when we were trying to think of what would shocked mean, the first thing that came to our minds is, well, they got to drop what they're holding.
Yes, and then we can just say when you're shocked, you're dazed, and you're defenseless. So you get a one hit, boom, drop everything that's holding in your hands, and because you're dazed, it means the fact that you dropped what you're holding is more of a problem. Maybe we could even add to that whatever you drop is sent flying out of your hands. So it means that you've got the choice now of, do you move to pick up your weapon? Because now you're not going to be able to attack with it. Or do you try to do something else with your action?
It doesn't stop the character or the monster from acting on their turn, but it says, you now don't have anything in your hands. What do you choose to do on your turn? What's of most value to you? Normally picking up your weapon is an interaction, but we could bake into the shocked condition that interactions have to be a bonus action for this character.
I would actually take that back to dazed, because then we create that problem where normally I'm not a huge fan of having it be overly complex how you spend actions to draw your weapons or pick things up. But this is a case where if we said dazed means that you also don't get a free object interaction. So now when you're shocked, drop the weapon. If you spend your turn picking up your weapon, that's your turn.
And I think that we could tack this on to certain existing spells or abilities. If somebody's hit with a lightning bolt, they should get shocked.
I think it would be interesting if maybe you're only shocked with lightning bolt if you fail the saving throw by 5 or more.
Yeah, so we end up with graduated success or failures.
Totally.
And I think that also really works for making it worse if you really fail your saving throw. If you succeed, you're taking half damage. And if you fail, you get full damage. If you fail by too much, you're also shocked. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Pathfinder 2nd Edition does with a lot of its spells, and it's a system that works really well, and it's easily adapted to a lot of 5th edition stuff. So if we move on to burning, I think this is actually one where we don't need to use any of the previous conditions, but we can actually see that there's a lot of effects in the game that already cause burning. And they're not necessarily in the place where you would think they would be with fire spells. They're with acid spells. And this is the first thing that I think that we need to do with the burning condition specifically. You can be burning by acid and you can be burning by fire. So I think that burning has brackets beside it that say whether you're taking acid or fire damage from it. And then what the condition is going to say is you take a certain amount of damage at the start of your turn. And just like Tasha's Caustic Brew, you can spend an action to stop, drop, and roll and end the burning. But if you don't take that action or someone else doesn't do something to put you out, you just stay on fire.
And you take that additional damage every turn. What I like about this is, again, going back to our video game inspirations, usually when you look at the pillars created by elements, electricity does something that shocks and debilitates you. Fire is always the damager of the damage types. So piling on more damage with burning feels appropriate. Also, we have tried this in a few of our games, and what I love is when people say, forget it, I'm going to stay on fire because I got fighting to do. And then you have burning characters running up to enemies and smiting them and things like that. It ends up being very evocative at the table. I had my skeleton mage murdered by a burning paladin, and I just thought it was really great, and everybody was having a good time at the table. Even though the player was still taking ongoing burning damage, you give them a choice. Do you want to spend your turn putting out the fire, or do you have killing to do?
And I also like this even more because you don't have to be the one that puts the fire out on you if you're on fire. One of your allies could put it out too. And I think that there's a lot of room for improvising other effects and saying there's other ways that the fire could be put out, subject to the DM's discretion. One of the other kind of levers we could pull with this is we already put the bracket beside burning to indicate acid or fire. And in theory, you could make any damage type a burning damage. Like we could imagine necrotic burning. We could imagine perhaps even radiant burning. But we could also add the damage dice there to change how much damage it is based on the strength of the effect. So we actually now have an adaptable condition. A lot of the effects that set characters on fire in D&D 5th edition only do 1d10 fire damage. So we could say burning 1d10 fire. But if I want to create a spell or a monster ability that's way deadlier than that, I could say, well, this dragon's breath weapon inflicts burning 6d4 acid. Really shorthand, everyone knows what it means. And now it's a bigger choice. Maybe you're going to ignore 1d10 fire damage, but I don't know, 64 acid.
And this also means that, again, you can tack it onto existing abilities. Your sorcerer has Firebolt. Maybe it does burning 1d4. So it's not that much on a cantrip, but every turn they're taking 1d4 fire damage until they get rid of it.
What if there was a feat for fire damage and a feat for lightning damage that added burning and shocked to all of your spells or abilities that did that?
Then you could really bring to life the fire mage or the lightning mage or we're going to get to it in a second, the frost mage.
Yeah, so I could imagine there being a feat that was anytime one of your spells or effects inflicts fire damage, it causes the burning condition where the amount of damage that it burns for is scaled to the level of the spell that you're using. So yeah, maybe your Firebolt cantrip is only 1d4 burning, but Fireball, because you took this feat, does 2d6 extra burning to targets that fail their saving throw. And similarly speaking, that's where Shocked could be added to Lightning Bolt. The character has to take a feat or maybe a subclass feature to get this, and this way we can mod existing spells. Or we could just rewrite the spells or create new spells. But I like this.
So we've done lightning damage, we've done fire damage. Mm-hmm. What about cold damage? I think this is where we get to the frozen condition.
Yeah.
Which, again, I love freezing an enemy and then shattering an enemy. So how do we bring that to life in D&D?
Okay, so when I imagine being frozen, there's one version of the frozen condition where you just can't act. And I don't think we want to do that because, again, we're trying to avoid the you are frozen in a solid block of ice and can't do anything with your turn. I think what I want to go for here is the fantasy where the frozen condition is freezing your legs to the ground, but your arms and your head still might be free.
You're like
So,
frozen from like the
yeah,
waist-ish
exactly.
area, midriff down.
So I think with this one, when you're frozen, you are immobilized and defenseless. So attacks against you have an advantage, your speed is 0. But I think we can build more onto this to get that smash effect onto this.
I think that what we should add to this is we've talked about the helpless condition, which means that attacks against you are automatic crits. But when you're frozen, it's more specific than that. A sword's not going to do it, but a hammer will.
So you're helpless against bludgeoning damage.
Helpless against bludgeoning damage.
Yeah.
Now, to make the frozen condition work, that's pretty harsh. But I think what works best is if you can be broken out of the frozen condition by either taking fire damage, or if you just take enough damage, you get shattered out of it.
Yeah, because I think of all those times in fiction where someone does get hit by the bludgeoning damage and the ice falls off them. And so I think what we could also do is add the brackets to frozen, which give us the DC to break out on your turn with a strength check. So on your turn, you could try to break out. It's not like burning where you can automatically put yourself out. You have to try to break out of being frozen. And we can say it's DC 15. So this effect causes frozen DC 15. But then if you take 15 fire damage or 15 bludgeoning damage, it also ends the condition.
So we did try this at the table. I was playing a warlock who had repelling blast, and you froze me in place, and I was blasting the enemies away from me so that they wouldn't shatter me, but I was not strong enough to break out of the ice.
Yeah.
Finally, you did manage to take a troll who picked up a crate and threw it at me, which crit me. That knocked me out of the frozen condition, which actually didn't feel bad. It felt like what was actually happening with the frozen condition is you stuck me in place and said, you're going to get crit eventually.
Unless you break out.
Unless you break out. And it kind of is like tucking that crit away and saving it. And that instills a sense of fear in the player, like, oh no, I don't want this troll to throw this crate at me.
Yeah.
But as soon as you did, the condition was over and I got to carry on. It didn't kill me. It just did a bunch of damage and I got to stand up and continue blasting.
Totally. I think that I really like these conditions because I think that burning, shocked, and frozen all feel like they're scary, but they're all ways that the player who's suffering the condition or the monster suffering the condition can interact with it. And I like that all of them feel scalable.
So up on screen right now, these are kind of the texts that we have for these 3 conditions. They're still a work in progress for us, but just so that you can actually see the way that it looks mechanically.
Yeah, we've been trying these out in some of our games recently, and they've been a lot of fun at the table. And we've been trying to find more spells, conditions, and other monsters and effects to change out what they do for these conditions. And it's been working really, really well so far. We would love to hear your feedback about burning, frozen, and shocked. And if you have other ideas for other conditions that we might change in other ways. We had a few more thoughts on some other existing conditions that we could be adding to the game. In particular, one of the things that we were looking at is currently in the game, there is this condition that happens that is you have disadvantage on attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws involving X ability score. And we thought about maybe those should all have a name for what they are. Like maybe strength is enfeebled and maybe dexterity is clumsy, which is, I think, what again, Pathfinder calls it clumsy when dexterity is debuffed. So I think those could be interesting opportunities as well for more conditions. And I want to think more about other conditions that do these things where the player has an interesting choice to make about how they want to respond rather than just having their turn taken away from them.
Another thing that we were considering and have been working on is conditions that debilitate or debuff players, but without stunning them or incapacitating them. Again, Stunning your players is really boring for them. It's not fun. Yeah, sometimes the monk gets to stun the monster, and that's great for them. But we've stunned players, and I've never seen a player have a great time being stunned.
You know what else is overused now? Disadvantage. Disadvantage and penalties, I feel like, are just such an easy solution, and it's just math. It doesn't necessarily feel like your character is dealing with something. So for me, I was thinking of another fourth edition condition that is in fifth edition, but only in the spell Ray of Enfeeblement. And it is weakened, which is half damage with attacks. And I think weakened, and just, it is a penalty, but it's not an accuracy penalty. It's a damage debuff. And for some reason, I feel like it feels bad to be weakened, but your turn isn't taken away from you.
If you're a high level fighter, you can still make all of your attacks. You can action surge.
Yeah.
You're just not doing as much damage. You still get all of your bonuses, all of your dice rolls. You can still take your turn as normal, just less damage. With that example, though, I think that there is another way that you can debuff something like a high level fighter. And that's using a condition that I'm calling staggered, where if a character is staggered, on their turn as an action, they can only make a single attack if they take the attack action, regardless of the options that they have available.
Like when you hit something in a video game and they block it, and you kind of have that stagger animation that stops you from attacking in that window.
Yeah.
That would be cool. I also wonder, you know, the rule for bonus action spell casting, where if you cast a spell using a bonus action, you can't cast anything except a cantrip with your action. What if that was just a condition? What if we said a character could become bewildered and you couldn't cast spells except for cantrips when you're bewildered?
Right. So having a bewildering effect on a spellcaster stops them from being able to cast anything but their memorized lowly cantrips.
Yeah.
The mental capacity taken to cast a spell is diminished by being bewildered.
And maybe you could add the bewildered disadvantage on concentration checks.
Right.
And then you really have to be like, okay, am I going to play it safe for now? That could be an interesting way of scaring a spellcaster without, again, stunning them, just ending their concentration immediately and saying you don't get a turn now. And so I think that I would be really interested in thinking about, is there more ground here? More conditions that don't take away the turns, that don't just resort to disadvantage. And I think what we've seen, just by talking about it today, is there are.
And in our playtests at the table that we've done with several of these options, some we're still tweaking and some we've tried several times, but at no point did any of the players involved feel confused or lost on adding all of these conditions. My biggest fear was that by adding more conditions to your game, that's more stuff for your players to memorize. But if we tag the right name onto these, if you say you're frozen, well, it already implies several things that all that you're trying to do is make sure that the name and the fantasy match the mechanics. And if you can do that, then adding more of these to your game actually ends up making a more robust combat encounter that allows you to do a lot more different things where everybody still feels like they have agency, they have turns to take, they have lots of actions and options in front of them, but they're dealing with the negative effects of something as simple as even making weather conditions a part of it. If there's a lightning storm, you could have the shocked condition affect a player every turn. If you're in the middle of a volcano, somebody could be set on fire by falling rocks of fire. Or there's ways that you can implement conditions now that make a problem for the players to overcome, but they can still overcome them.
And on the note of trying to remember all these conditions, beyond the fact that the evocative name does a lot of work, I do think that things like tokens and reference sheets and VTTs make it a lot easier and it makes it more easier to track, because the reality is that monsters in 5th edition already have tons and tons of abilities that are super unique and often hard to remember what they're supposed to do. So this way, by unifying a couple of these common effects, it makes it easier to remember at the table during play, because you do have the reference tool there, as opposed to being like, oh yeah, you got hit by this vampire's ability and now here's this entire paragraph of text that explains what's happening to you, but we can now shorten that and just be like, you're dazed.
So these are some of the ideas that we have for conditions that we're homebrewing and trying out in our home games. If you have any conditions that you've been using or have ideas for conditions, tell us about them in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider becoming a patron by following the links in the description below.
And in some of the recent episodes of our actual play, we've been trying a few of these conditions, and you can check all of those episodes out in our live play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can check out the previous episodes right up over here.
And we've got plenty more homebrewing videos for 5th edition right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.